week we have experienced deep grief with the loss of precious ones among us, and also abundant joy because of God's promises and the new birth of Heidi Eastman. Today we think about so many among us who continue year after year to reach those great milestones in their lives. And we're happy for the Olsons and the Alphans, the Fuquays, the Snyders reaching a big 61 this past Thursday, the Reisingers, the Mosleys, the Rosses, the Stringers, and the Darnells. I hope my math is accurate. What do you think? And there may be others we've left out, but this is a time of year that so many are celebrating God's blessings in your lives. Faith-forming fathers. Everett has read for us the challenge we have as dads to exhort and encourage and implore each one to walk worthy of the God who calls us into His kingdom and glory. And preceding that is the verse that tells us the character we strive to have as men of God when it speaks of living in a way that's devout and upright and blameless. We want to think today about the fact that God uses us as leaders of the home to mold and shape and fashion our children into the image of Jesus Christ, and to talk about some ways that we can do that. If I were to ask you, where's the first place in the Bible that speaks of someone being in another's image? You'd say Genesis 1, 26 and 27. God made man, male and female, in His image. If I were to say what's the second place, it would be Genesis 5:3. Adam had a son in his likeness, according to Adam's image, and he named him Seth. Wow. Adam made in the image of God. Now a son in the image, yes, of God, as we all are, but also of his father. And what would that son be? Does that mean he looked like him, walked like him, talked like him? Does it have to do with the way he lived his life? Well, Genesis 3 goes on to detail the godly lineage that followed. And at the end of that chapter, we have Noah, who is a descendant of Seth. The word Seth means to put in place of, because Cain had killed Abel. And now here was a son given as a result of God's blessing to this family to put in place of. Dads, it occurred to me that as we've been building doll houses, bicycles, train sets, tents, forts, bunk beds, Lego sets, and remember those Pinewood Derby cars? That God, through us, wanted to build our children. And that in all the time and all the activities and all the moments we share with our sons and daughters, God has a plan, and He's called us to be strong, to walk with Him, and to be the tools within His hands. When Christopher and Carissa were small, we took a couple of road trips across out west with my favorite mother-in-law in the car. We visited Mount Rushmore, and we wanted to see the Chief Crazy Horse Monument, which we did in the Black Hills of South Dakota. And I've been told that Crazy Horse's head, which you can see in the distance, part of Thunderhead Mountain, they're blasting away whatever doesn't fit what he looked like, that his head alone would hold all the heads of Mount Rushmore. You see, there was a fellow named Joukowsky, who was a descendant of the Lakota Indian chief. And others came to him and said, we'd like something to represent a great hero, a warrior, a leader. And so he, for the rest of his life, even until his death, spent all he had blasting away at Thunderhead Mountain to form the image of Chief Crazy Horse. And when he died, Joukowsky's children and extended family carried on. You see, he had an image in his mind. He could see, as this graphic demonstrates when you visit there, that mountain could be cut. It could be changed. Things removed, and what would be left would be for all the world to see that which he had helped to bring about. You and I, dads, that's our calling.
I don't know about that face. What about you? But I do know that it's huge and that the world is amazed at what took place because of all of that effort. I want us to think today about being faith-forming fathers. Having this clay that is soft, that can be put in a form, that can be turned, that can be influenced, that's eventually going to become firm and hardened, and to ask ourselves how we can mold it. John Anderson sang these words, "Hey, I'm just an old chunk of coal, but I'm going to be a diamond someday. I'm going to grow and glow till I'm so blue, pure, perfect, I'm going to put a smile on everybody's face. I'm going to kneel and pray every day, lest I should become vain along the way. I'm just an old chunk of coal now, Lord, but I'm going to be a diamond one day. I'm going to learn the best way to walk. I'm going to search and find a better way to talk. I'm going to spit and polish my old, rough-edged self till I get rid of every single flaw. I'm going to be the world's best friend, going to go around shaking everybody's hand. I'm going to be the cotton-picking rage of the age. I'm going to be a diamond someday. Now I'm just an old chunk of coal." Think about coal, the clay. Think about what God puts in our hands and how we can be His tools to make of our sons and daughters grown, independent adults who will honor Him and serve Him and walk with Him. Here are some suggestions that come to my mind. First of all, as dads, we don't own the clay. God does. There was a time in Jeremiah chapter 18 when the Lord sent the prophet down to the potter's house, and he saw the wheel, and there was the clay and the molding and the fashioning, and God said He was the potter, Israel was the clay, and He said that I can do with you as He does with that which He's forming on the wheel. Romans 9:19-21 reminds us of the same principle, that we are under subjection to God, and therefore everything we see and know is His. There are 32 Bible verses that talk about clay. You may want to look them up, but I want to start by realizing that this child, in the ultimate sense, is God's child. I'm a steward. I need to know the Lord, know the plan, know the map and the direction. And then a second idea is that we need to realize this is our role. This is not for our wives to do what we as men are to do. We're not to sit back and somehow wait for someone else to turn our children into what God wants them to be. Oh, the Bible class teacher can be a great supplement, and a Christian camp, and a vacation Bible school, and worship gatherings, and services, and sermons. But these are the things that God can use to help what Dad is teaching and modeling and showing at home. Don't provoke your children to anger, Ephesians 6:4. How do we do that? By maybe expecting too much too soon? By being impatient or demanding? By being rough and harsh? But notice on the positive side, bring them up in the discipline, that is, make them disciples. Teach, instruct, admonish, guide them. Oh, just looking through Scripture, Eli, Samuel, David, Solomon, all great men in various ways. They failed as fathers. Even Samuel, growing up and seeing what happened to Eli. Samuel's own sons were such that they could not take his place. And that was part of the reason, because of their evil, that the people cried out for a king. Think of David conquering all these foes, but the turmoil, the sword, the enmity within his own house. And Solomon, whose son Rehoboam was part of the dividing of the kingdom in the north and south. And then what about Joseph? Isn't it fascinating that God used a carpenter who was not Jesus' father because he was divinely conceived and Mary was a virgin? Here's the one stepping in. He works with wood. He makes things. And now he's used so that when Jesus is a child, they're in the synagogue, They're at the temple for Passover. When Jesus is a baby, he's brought, he's circumcised, he's named. And Joseph would have been the one who would have recognized, this is not really my child, but there's something I am to do that no one else is accountable or expected to do. Dads, let's step up. Let's be bold. Let's eagerly embrace that which God has given us. We've touched on this idea already of being what we urge our children to be, because we can't bring them where we have not gone. We can't teach them a lesson that we haven't learned ourselves. And so when Paul writes Timothy, not his physical child, but in the faith, he said, follow the outline, the sketch, the pattern of sound, healthy words you've heard from me. And then look at 2 Timothy 3:10. My teaching, my conduct, my aim in life, my faith, patience, love, and steadfastness. And I wonder to myself, for you and me as fathers, if our children followed our teaching, followed our conduct, followed our aim, what would they be? What would their lives be like? You and I know that we can't guarantee the way a young person is going to turn out, because they're independent moral agents and will eventually choose for themselves. But we can make sure that we have something to show them, something to give them as God's apprentices. You see, God's not finished sculpting us yet, is He? Aren't we still like Thunderhead Mountain? There's a part of us men that looks like Jesus that others can notice. And then there's still some cutting and chiseling and changing to be done. It seems to me we become better fathers as we grow in the image of Christ. If we're on His wheel, then our children will benefit from it. What's the end in mind with which we might begin? It is for each one to be conformed to the image of God's Son. Wow! We want our children to resemble Christ in their behavior, their attitude, their speech, their lifestyle. So if I know that's the end game, if I can see the picture from the start, then I'm going to steer and work more effectively to take us to that point. Galatians 4:19, Paul spoke as if he were in the anguish of childbirth, as a woman, a mother would be. For what purpose? Until Christ is formed in you. He said, I'm concerned I've labored over you in vain, all that we've done together. And now I'm in that struggle once again, because all I want for you is for Christ to be formed. Dads, let's tell our children that's all we want for them. Different personality and ability, different skills and interests and age and gender. But the one thing we want for every child is to be conformed to the image of Christ. And then we can tell them along the way, you may not understand everything that Dad is doing, why we said yes or no, but I want you to know that my ultimate aim as your father is this one. Thunderhead Mountain, Chief Crazy Horse, I want you to be like Jesus. Our children are precious to us. It's easy for us as men to expect too much too soon. To wonder why our child is not exactly like someone else. Each created by God. Pure and fresh. No sin, no contamination. Potential. What? Talk about Noah. What could this one person do? Think about a Joseph, or an Esther, or a Ruth, or a Mary, or a Timothy, or a Titus. The uniqueness that causes us to raise our estimation of each one born to us. And that child growing to maturity and choosing to sin is one for whom Jesus gave his life so that he or she could have forgiveness and cleansing and start afresh. And then the rewards that come from this precious one God has given us to share, to watch over, to lead and shape for a short time. And then I was thinking too that there are so many other influences that would come in, do what can happen if we fathers don't put up the security, lock the fence, and shut them out. I'm thinking about influences and peers and temptations. I'm thinking about pornography and the internet. I'm thinking about the issues that come if we have not prepared, if we've not monitored, if we've not walked alongside of our children. If you were to look online at this fewer taboos, values worsening, you would find several websites that note the same thing, that on a list of 19 major moral issues of the day, Americans express levels of acceptance that are as high or higher than they've ever been, especially on 12 of them. These include polygamy, having a child out of wedlock, divorce, social and values issues across the age spectrum, not just with young people. The largest shifts have to do with those matters relating to gay and lesbian issues, and our children are facing this in the world in which they live. Oddly enough, though, 72% of Americans say the state of values is getting worse in our country. Here, Americans are accepting more and more and more, and yet you ask them, are things getting worse? They're getting worse. Wonder how the two get together if they're not getting worse, because people are accepting more and more and more. Fathers, we must know that which confronts our children, and it must be over our bodies that they would be able to defile and destroy and hurt the soul of our sons and daughters. Sometime back in Denver, Colorado, the Mile High City, some of you have lived in that area, beautiful place to visit. 50,000 people gathered for a demonstration that had to do with the role of fathers. They put in the front a 15-year-old boy. He was blindfolded and barefoot. And he was walking an obstacle course, very dangerous, filled with a dozen steel animal traps. Right in front of the teen, there were the grim gray jaws of a huge bear trap, so powerful it could crush the child's leg, so large that just setting that trap required 3 men. And several feet over to the left of the bear trap, a beaver trap, quick and potent. Out in the crowd, the boy's father. Everyone watched as he began to take, that is the teen boy, one step, carefully and slowly. The first one was okay, the second too, but the third one, he went directly toward the bear trap. Then suddenly his father, Tom, screamed into a microphone, "Trent, stop! Don't take another step. I'll be right there." And his voice echoed through that cavernous mile-high stadium. The air sucked out of the arena. Suddenly a silence broke, and no one moved except Tom. He was the dad. You'd be sure Trent, the 15-year-old, did not move. He waited obediently. His father circled the trap field, stepped in between his son and the bear trap. The dad whispered instructions to his son, and then turned his back to him, and the young man eagerly placed his hands on his father's shoulders. Slowly taking very small and deliberate steps, Tom maneuvered through the trap field, his son nearly glued to his back, his hands gripping his father's shoulders, his shuffling feet often clipping his dad's heels. Tom stayed as far from the traps as possible, not taking the slightest risk that Trent might bump a trap with his bare toes. Father, you and I are Tom. And our sons and our daughters are Trent. And we know what those traps are. Alcohol, drugs, sexual immorality, rebellion, pornography, peer pressure. And we can see those dangers because we're older, perhaps, and because we've become more aware in ways that they cannot. And if you imagine your child is blindfolded and barefoot out there in a minefield where the devil has put just those things which he thinks might do the job, you and I can stand up and speak up and step up. Tools. We love our toolboxes, don't we? Sometimes finding just the right one for a project, borrowing from another, or adapting. How many of us have broken a tool by using it for the wrong thing? Our children don't have those toolboxes yet. We are to fill theirs, as we do with our little boys, sometimes getting them the harmless plastic toys so they can practice. I would have never thought of using string to mold clay. But it seems to me that would accomplish something that others would not. I like books written about parenting and fatherhood. One is called Solid Answers by James Dobson. In fact, I like just about everything James Dobson wrote. Solid Answers. And it goes through discipline and various ages and things to be taught and things to watch out for. It's a great tool. Another one, Preparing for Adolescence by Dennis and Barbara Rainey. That's where I found the story about Tom and Trent and the traps. Preparing for adolescence. Such a tumultuous time of adjustment and change and growth. Fathers, we need those tools. We need a bigger box. We need to borrow and learn and listen. You know, sometimes it's easy to skip the steps. To, if all else fails, read the instructions. Are you like that? Every stage, every chapter is special and is different. I need to know what 2-year-olds are like when I have a 2-year-old. And in a 5-year-old, I need to take the time to savor and taste and drink in every part of it. And be careful that I don't go too far and provoke my children, Colossians 3:21, to discourage them or create resentment. Psalm 103, the Father in heaven shows compassion. He knows that we are made dust. We must be like that with our children. Patient, thoughtful, setting everything else aside to listen, to make the most of today. The Bible says the days are evil, Ephesians 5:16, and that we must walk circumspectly, that is, looking in all directions, 360 degrees. That's what we're to do as wise men. And we are to make the best use of the time. Today will not come again. We must understand the will of the Lord in order to share something of God's will with our child day by day. Well, there's the glob of clay. Some things have to be cut out because they don't fit the image. Dad, be strong. Be firm. Be clear with your children. That, whatever it is, does not fit the image of Christ. We're not going to talk that way or think that way or live that way. We're going to cut that out. And then fill in, because where there's a gap or something missing, we want to take and have it look just as it ought to. The very best that we can do. There's a time in our lives when we can start over again. Jeremiah 18 talks about that, when it suggests that the potter that the prophet was watching, if the clay was spoiled, he could rework it. I never was any good, even with Play-Doh. How about you? It seemed like we'd be in a group, I don't remember where or when, but I was old enough, I should have been able to make something. I couldn't. We were to fashion some kind of little animal out of each piece. I couldn't do it. Everybody else had, but I thought, you know what I can do? I can squish it. And I can try again. And then I can do it one more time. And one more time. And there's a period in which I can do that. But then that clay is going to be firm. And that's very important because Dad's not going to be around on this earth for all that long. And when the clay becomes firm, I want to have fashioned it in such a way. And again, that person can make his or her own decisions as our children grow up. But for my part, to do what I can do, so that when it becomes firm, it is in that form. I saw online where a woman wanted to make stone in the image of two dogs. And so she started with a slab of stone. But before she actually worked with that, she took clay and she made the dogs out of that material so that she could look at that, and from that model, she could actually craft in stone that which would be permanent. So it is for you and me. When our children are small, we'll work with the clay. The clay is going to become more and more firm. At the same time, you and I as dads can continue to influence and to love and to share. Even as our children are young adults and even as they grow and the years go on, because we can continue to try to live by that same example. The time will also come that the clay will need to carry on and do some fashioning of its own. I love Psalm 78. He commanded fathers to teach their children, so the next generation might know. The children yet unborn, and arise and tell them to their children. You ever realize you're raising your grandchildren when you have little ones in your home? That you are trying to do for them what you want them to do for your grandchildren and for the next generations to come. And then finally, bond the clay to Him. Clay has a way of fastening and holding. If it's formed and if it's stuck to that which really matters, it can often hold. And when we seek to lead our children to Jesus Christ, there we find what lasts long beyond our years on this earth, that they might enjoy eternity with the Lord. That's the reason the Father in heaven sent His Son to mold us and save us and deliver us. That's why we offer His invitation, that everyone can be His son or His daughter. Everyone can experience newness of life. If you would come and respond, why not now as we stand and sing?